He thought it was just a joke, a smug challenge thrown at the janitor, meant to humiliate. But what happened in those next 3 chess moves? Left an entire boardroom speechless and changed to lives forever. In the heart of the city stood a towering glass skyscraper, its mirrored windows glinting like armor beneath the sun. Inside, the top floor hummed with the quiet chaos of power suits moving briskly, polished shoes tapping against marble, and voices always just short of shouting. This was the headquarters of one of the largest corporate empires in the country. Deals were made here that shaped industries, fortunes changed with a signature, and egos bloomed as big as the skyline itself. But tucked in the background of all that noise was a man no one noticed. He pushed a mop, wore gloves that never stayed, white, and moved silently like he didn't belong, except the floors always shone where he passed, and not once had anyone complained about him. He spoke to no one unless spoken to. And when he did, it was always with a respectful nod, a soft yes sir, or yes ma'am. The only person who really saw him, truly saw him, was the CEO's fiancée, a thoughtful woman who worked quietly as the executive assistant. She had a kind face, always asked how people were doing, and treated everyone the same, executives and janitors alike. She noticed how the man never missed a shift, how he stayed late when storms rolled in, and how he never took the free lunches others scrambled for. Still, she never pried. But one thing piqued her curiosity. Every day like clockwork, during his 15-minute break, he sat at a small table in the loading dock with a battered chessboard. Alone, no phone, no music. Just him, the board, and his thoughts. His hands moved fast, confidently, like the pieces already knew where they had to go. That curiosity led her to mention it, half in passing, to the CEO one evening. He laughed hard, too hard. The janitor? Playing chess? He scoffed. What's next? The security guard doing brain surgery? He thought it was hilarious. So hilarious, in fact, that the very next day, he decided to see it for himself. Mid-afternoon, with nothing on his schedule but another round of self-congratulations. He made his way down to the loading dock flanked by 2 executives, already smiling like he had a joke ready. And there the janitor was hunched slightly, brow furrowed, fingers moving with precision and purpose across the old wooden board. Well, look at that, the CEO said loudly, startling the silence. Deep in thought, are we? The janitor looked up slowly, eyes calm, and simply nodded. You play often? The CEO asked, circling the table like a lion toying with its prey. The janitor nodded again. You any good? Another nod, though. This one held a spark behind it. The assistant, who had followed the group down, stepped in then. He's very good, she said, her voice steady. I've seen him checkmate 3 games in under 10 minutes. The CEO raised a brow, then laughed. Really? This I've got to see? Then, without warning, he pulled out the chair opposite the janitor and sat down. Tell you what, he said, loud enough for people nearby to hear. Let's make this interesting. He paused for effect, then added, beat me in a game, and I'll marry you myself. The room fell quiet. For a heartbeat then erupted in laughter. Phones came out. Someone whispered, is he serious? But the CEO was already grinning like he'd won. You in, he said, eyes locked on the janitor. Come on, one game. Tomorrow at lunch. In the boardroom, everyone can watch. Should be fun. The janitor didn't flinch, didn't laugh, didn't look away, simply reached out and reset the board with slow, deliberate movements. Then he looked up at the CEO with a tiny, unreadable smile and said only, tomorrow. The CEO stood, already celebrating. This is going to be great, he said to his entourage, walking off like the matter was settled. I'll bring the champagne for the reception. More laughter. Someone clapped him on the back. One exec whispered, you're brutal. The janitor, meanwhile, stayed where he was, cleaning up the pieces, stacking them gently into a cloth bag. The assistant lingered a moment. You sure you want to do this? She asked softly. He looked at her then, really looked, and he smiled not nervously, not smugly, just a calm, centered smile that seemed older than his years. He replied simply, so I'll play. That night, Word spread faster than any corporate memo. Chess match of the century. One email. Joked CEO versus janitor. Winner gets the girl. It was all anyone could talk about. Most assumed it was just a publicity stunt. A joke. A game meant to make the boss look clever, charming, relatable. No one expected the janitor to actually show up. Some said he'd back out. Others joked that he wouldn't even know how to move the pieces in front of an audience. But he came. Early. Quiet. Dressed exactly the same. Gloves off. Hands folded neatly. He set up the board himself in the corner of the boardroom, where sunlight poured through tall windows. People filed in slowly, buzzing with anticipation. Phones were out. Whispers filled the air. The CEO arrived 10 minutes late. Of course, he made an entrance. Always had to. He wore a smug grin, clapped a few hands, even posed for a picture, holding a chess piece like he was already victorious. But the janitor said nothing. Just waited. Tomorrow had come. The board was set. By noon the next day, the atmosphere on the top floor had shifted from business as usual to something theatrical. The boardroom, normally a space reserved for quarterly reviews and power lunch. Negotiations now buzzed like an arena. Employees who usually moved quietly between tasks now clustered at the doorway, peeking in. Even the company's media team, always hunting for internal culture moments, had set up 2 discreet cameras in the corners. The air was thick with anticipation, a strange cocktail of amusement and disbelief. People whispered over cups of coffee, speculating whether the janitor would actually show up. Some placed friendly bets. Most assumed this would be a 5-minute humiliation, followed by a round of self-congratulatory applause for the boss. At 12:02, the door swung open, and the CEO strode in like a showman entering center stage. He wore an expensive, tailored suit, and the grin of a man convinced of his invincibility. He waved at a few familiar faces, flashed a confident smile at the media team, and adjusted his cufflinks like this was all just part of another clever brand move. His ego filled the room before he even reached the table. Chairs had been pulled back to give space, but people still stood shoulder to shoulder, holding their breath for what they expected would be a laughable encounter. Then the janitor entered. He didn't walk like someone out to prove anything. He moved with quiet intent, the same way he always had when pushing his cart or wiping down glass. No applause, no cheers. Just a respectful stillness followed him in. He wore his same work uniform, pressed, clean, simple. His eyes didn't scan the crowd. They focused only on the board, which had been freshly set in the center of the long mahogany table. Without a word, he walked over, pulled out his chair, and sat down. He opened a cloth bag and placed his own chess clock next to the board. The pieces were standard, the same set they'd used the day before. But now the board sat in front of an audience, and the tension wrapped around it like invisible rope. The CEO sat opposite him, still grinning. "Let's make this quick," he said with a chuckle, cracking his knuckles. "I've got a 1 o'clock call with Tokyo." Someone in the back laughed. A few phones came up again, quietly filming. The janitor nodded once. The game began. With a swift flick of his hand, the janitor opened with a bold gambit, an unorthodox move not found in beginner playbooks. The murmur that rippled through the room wasn't just from the spectators. Even a few self-proclaimed chess hobbyists furrowed their brows, unsure if it was genius or a blunder. But the janitor didn't hesitate. He tapped the clock. Time passed. The CEO chuckled and leaned back, making a theatrical show of thinking, then moved a piece in what looked like a strong position, but in doing so, he ignored the delicate positioning of his opponent's earlier move. That was his mistake. Janitor's second move came fast, immediate, like it had already been pre-calculated. The trap began to spring. 2 more pieces repositioned with silent precision, and a pattern began to emerge, at least to those who understood the game. A low murmur spread as the realization hit a few observers early. The CEO, still clueless, laughed again, moved a piece that looked aggressive. He glanced around the room, raising his eyebrows as if saying, "See? Easy." Then came the third move, A swift, almost imperceptible shift. The janitor's bishop moved across the board and landed with a click, perfectly angled, silence complete. Silence. Then he pressed the clock. Checkmate. For a moment, no one moved. The CEO's eyes scanned the board, confused. He leaned in, blinked, tried to trace the last few moves. He frowned, looked up. Wait, what? Checkmate, the janitor said quietly. The room froze. The air went completely still, as if someone had turned off the oxygen. Phones slowly began to lower. Eyes widened. Few gasps slipped out. And then, a voice from the back, a low whisper. That said it all. That was 3 moves. CEO sat frozen, mouth slightly open. His smile was gone. He looked around, searching for someone to disagree, someone to say it wasn't over, that it was a mistake, a fluke. But the board said otherwise, and so did the stunned silence of the people surrounding it. The assistant, standing near the corner, stared at the board with a look that mixed admiration and disbelief. Her eyes weren't on the CEO anymore. They were on the man across from him, who now began quietly resetting the board, piece by piece. Her expression softened, shifted. There was no mockery in her face, no confusion. Just a kind of deep recognition that she'd witnessed something few ever got to see, a quiet brilliance revealed in full view of those who had overlooked it. The CEO finally broke the silence. His voice dry and too loud. Best 2 out of 3? He muttered, forcing a chuckle. But no one laughed. No one clapped. The magic had broken, but not in his favor. The janitor didn't respond. He packed up the chess clock, gently folded the cloth bag around the pieces, and stood. He gave a small nod to the assistant, then turned to leave. No gloating. No words. Just the sound of his footsteps fading into the stunned quiet of the room. No one moved to stop him, not even the CEO, who now sat alone in front of the board, surrounded by executives who couldn't look him in the eye. The cameras kept rolling, silently in the corners, capturing every frame, the rise, the fall. And the man who had just won the game before it had even truly begun. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, casting golden streaks through the glass walls of the skyscraper, the story had spread like wildfire. Not just through whispers and side conversations, but through group chats, internal emails, and lunchroom debates. Everyone was talking about it, the 3-move checkmate. The janitor who had dismantled the CEO without blinking, and the stunned silence that followed. It wasn't just office gossip anymore. Someone had pulled the security footage from the boardroom cameras, trimmed it down, added a dramatic freeze frame, and uploaded it to the company's internal network. Within an hour, it had been leaked. By evening, it was everywhere. Social media erupted with headlines like "Checkmate in a suit" and "corporate CEO loses in 3 moves to janitor genius." The comments were relentless. Some laughed, others were inspired. A few called it staged, too good to be true. But most just watched it over and over, trying to catch the moment when everything shifted. The janitor, meanwhile, didn't flinch. He showed up for his night shift right on time. Same uniform, same walk, same quiet efficiency. When coworkers approached him with awe, he simply nodded or offered a soft smile. He turned down every podcast request, every news interview, every curious executive who wanted to learn more about the mind behind the moves. He declined them all. He wasn't interested in becoming a sensation, just wanted to mop the floors, take his break, and go home in peace. The sudden attention didn't excite him. If anything, it seemed to weigh on him like an old, familiar coat he'd once worn and purposely taken off. But not everyone could let it go. The assistant, still quietly rattled by what she had witnessed, sought him out the next day. She found him in the janitor's closet between tasks, organizing supplies with the same methodical care he'd shown on the chessboard. She didn't knock, just stepped inside and closed the door softly behind her. He looked up, unsurprised. "I need to ask," she said gently. "How did you do it that fast?" He paused, then offered her a stool. I recognized his rhythm. He said simply, "He moves like someone who memorized a playbook but never really played. That makes him predictable." That doesn't explain how you knew exactly what he'd do in just 2 turns. I didn't know, I guessed. But I've spent years watching people move. She tilted her head. You're not just a janitor, are you? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up a rag and began folding it slowly. Then, in a voice lower than before, he said, I used to play professionally. National circuit, traveled, won tournaments. They called me the kid with the iron focus. She blinked. What happened? He set the folded rag down and looked her in the eye for the first time since she entered. Life happened, he said. I lost my brother. He taught me the game. Cancer took him before I made it to the world stage. After that, I couldn't find meaning in winning. What was the point if he wasn't there to watch? The room grew still. There was no pity in her expression, only a kind of deep respect, almost reverence. She didn't press him further. I walked away, he said quietly. Left the circuit. Gave up endorsements. Took a job cleaning schools, then offices. Something quiet. Something that gave me space to breathe. Why not? Return after all this? He shook his head. People see success as an invitation. But peace, that's personal. I found mine in silence, not in spotlights. Outside, the hum of elevators and typing drifted through the thin walls, but in that small closet, the air was sacred. She stood, slowly looking at him not as someone beneath the corporate ladder, but as someone who had mastered the game of life in ways most people never could. Later that day, the CEO made his move. Reeling from the embarrassment, desperate to reclaim control of the narrative, he invited the janitor to his office. It was not an apology. It was a transaction. I want to offer you a position, the CEO said, hands steepled over his glass. Desk, chess coach, public appearances. Teach strategy to my executive team. We'll pay you well, of course. The janitor didn't respond. The CEO leaned forward. Or, if you'd prefer to walk away, I can offer you a settlement. A generous one. Just keep this quiet. Don't fuel the press. The janitor looked at the man across the desk with the same calm expression he'd worn during the match. Then he stood. You already lost, he said quietly. Not at the board here. And without another word, he turned and walked out. The CEO remained seated, furious but powerless. A man who realized too late that some things couldn't be bought as the evening drew in. The janitor stood by the window on the 42nd floor, watching the city blur beneath him. Cars crawled along glowing streets. People moved like ants. In their own hurried patterns, he sipped his coffee, now lukewarm, and let the chaos remain where it belonged outside. Behind him, the building pulsed with energy, corporate decisions still flying down hallways. But in that quiet moment, with the skyline stretched before him, he was untouched by it all. He had no interest in climbing the ladder. Didn't need. 2. He had already played the game, and he had already won. The company wasted no time in trying to control the damage. Then 48 hours of the now viral chess match, they announced a formal press event. The invitation was styled like a celebration, complete with corporate banners, catered refreshments, and a carefully scripted theme about uncovering hidden talent in the workplace. It was branded as a story of inspiration, a clever twist, too. Turn the embarrassment into a marketing win. The CEO stood tall behind the podium, wrapped in his usual performance of charm and wit, spinning the narrative with practiced ease. He laughed about the match, called it a planned surprise, and claimed the whole thing had been meant to encourage diversity, inclusion, and fresh thinking across company levels. Although some applauded. Others exchanged glances, seeing right through it. But the cameras kept rolling, the media team smiled, and it all seemed to be going exactly as rehearsed then. Without being introduced or invited, the janitor appeared. He stepped onto the stage from the side, calm as ever, wearing his work uniform like a badge of truth. The crowd quieted. The CEO turned, his smile faltering, and the assistants seated in the front rows sat up straighter. The janitor didn't touch the microphone at first, simply stood there, letting the silence thicken. And then he spoke, voice steady and low, but cutting through the air like a blade. I wasn't supposed to speak today, he began. In fact, I wasn't even supposed to be seen. Not really. I was meant to be part of the background, the one you walk past, not the one you listen to. The audience leaned in, unsure whether this was a moment of inspiration or rebellion. But something strange happened. He continued. A joke was made. A game was played. And suddenly, everyone remembered I existed. He paused, eyes sweeping. Over the suits and ties, the polished shoes, and practiced expressions, it wasn't a publicity stunt. It wasn't part of anyone's strategy. It was a challenge made from arrogance. And it turned into a mirror one that revealed what we don't. Want to admit that talent doesn't wear a name tag, and respect doesn't come with a title? The CEO shifted uncomfortably behind him, but the janitor didn't flinch. I didn't come here to shame anyone. I'm not angry. I'm not here for revenge. I came because I thought maybe, just maybe, it's time someone in this building said something real. We talk a lot about values, about leadership. But real leadership begins with how you treat the person cleaning your floors. The assistant lowered her eyes, visibly moved. I don't want a promotion, he went on. I don't want my name on a wall or a paycheck with more zeros. I want something harder. I want dignity. I want every person who works in silence to be seen. I want the next janitor, the next intern, the next quiet mind, to be treated with the same human respect we so freely give to those with power. There was no applause yet. It's just a heavy, thoughtful quiet, the kind that happens when truth stings. More than anyone expects, he ended simply, "That's all I came to say." Then he stepped away from the microphone, turned, and left the stage the same way he arrived, without ceremony, without spotlight. But leaving the air changed behind him. The room erupted into scattered claps, hesitant at first, then fuller as people stood, not for the CEO, not for the company, but for the man who reminded them all what humility looked like in its purest form. The assistant didn't wait until the event ended. She stood up, walked straight to the CEO, and said in a low, unwavering voice, "This isn't the kind of man I want to spend my life with." Cameras caught the moment, but she didn't care. She turned and walked out, leaving him speechless beneath the lights. Later, after the crowd had gone, and the news had already begun to twist the story into 1,000 versions of itself, the assistant found herself sitting alone on a park bench not far from the office. A light breeze rustled the trees overhead, and the city sounded distant for once. Then, without fanfare, the janitor approached. No words were exchanged at first. He simply sat beside her and pulled a small travel chessboard from his bag, unfolded it between them, and set up the pieces. They played in silence, letting the world carry on around them. No cameras, no crowd, no competition. Just two people, one move at a time, each learning the other slowly. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was something simpler, something more mutual respect. He didn't talk about the company, or the CEO, or the headlines that still circled like birds overhead. She didn't ask for explanations or direction. They just sat, exchanging moves, surrounded by the soft rhythms of the city. Neither trying to win, just enjoying the game. The sun dipped low again, casting long shadows across the board. A king moved. A pawn advanced. A bishop retreated. Then came stillness once more. A voice, quiet, reflective, broke over the closing scene. Some victories aren't about winning the game, but reminding the world that you were always worth more than their applause. And just like that, the game was over. Story by Simply Stories, where every voice counts.